Hello, and welcome to another episode of Solipsist Watched. I'm your host, the Social Solipsist, and this week I watched Perfect Blue from 1998. There's a lot to unpack in this movie. This movie was mentioned to me a few months ago, and it's been on my list of I have quite a lot of movies that I've been meaning to watch, and as I've mentioned before, some of them fall into a category of, I don't think I'm in the mood to watch this. And unfortunately, a lot of the time I'm not in the mood to watch certain things. Because I'm pretty sure they're going to require either a certain mental attitude or a certain mental fortitude to get myself through. And Perfect Blue is one of those things that has been on that list for a while. But it was mentioned, it came up in conversation a few months back, and then it was recently mentioned again in the last week. And I decided, you know what? I feel like this is probably the perfect time for me to go ahead and watch this movie. And while normally this is not, by most accounts, classified as a horror film, one, I'm not being that strict about the rules for October, but also this is very much a horror film. This is through and through a psychological horror film, in my opinion, and I think it is an extremely good one, and one partially that I'm glad I hadn't watched before this, and partially that I wish I had watched before, because here's the thing. I think this is a movie I could watch many, many times, and will probably be like, if I kept an actual list of my favorite films, it would be pretty high up there, because it's really, really strong in a lot of ways. But it is also deeply difficult to watch. It is not pleasant in many ways. And mostly that is not due specifically to what's on screen, but to the sort of psychological considerations you have to give to what's on screen. And that's going to be a trend throughout talking about this film, is that what's on screen is difficult and what's in your head is worse. And I think that says a lot about the quality of any film, and especially one that's going for what this one is going for. This is an anime, Japanese animated film, and coming out in 98, it's in kind of a weird place in terms of international recognition and also technological advancements that were happening in and around that time. It's also one that seems to have been neglected. Because while it is well appreciated, the actual rights to its distribution have traded hands several times, and the current version, as far as I'm aware, there has not been a recut or a re-release of this film, and that is very much to its detriment, because one of the first things that stuck out to me at the beginning of this film is it wasn't very pretty. And it took me a few minutes of watching to realize, oh, that's not the fault of the animation or anything about the production, really, for the most part. It is mostly that the film transfer is not very good. It doesn't look so bad that I would accuse it of being a VHS transfer to up-res to digital, but it's definitely suffering from a lot of like low quality transfer effects, and would be very much it would be that much more impactful if it got a proper digital transfer. Unfortunately, with a lot of these traditionally made animations, it's extremely difficult to, if it's even possible, to get a new transfer made, because of the way the frames are frame by frame assembled by hand and then basically photographed one frame at a time. And so if those original transfers were not up to snuff, the chances that all of the original art is still somewhere is probably low. Anyway, aside from some of the state of the presentation, this is an incredibly visually impactful film. It's funny because I went from thinking, oh, this doesn't look very good in the first few minutes, to within the first like third of the film going, oh, some of this animation is truly incredible and starts to rival what I would basically call the pinnacle of traditional Japanese animation, at least in cinema, that being Akira. It's a combination of the actual artistic talent and the visual direction and a whole bunch of other things that lead it to, well, it really shows off what you can do with animation. That when you're not restricted to what you can do with real people or real cameras or all these other things, and what you can do with stylistic choices that are not possible in an actual camera. This is on a short list of pieces of media that really show off what is truly possible. That really gets to talking about the director, Satoshi Kon, because he passed away, I think, in 2010. He did not have the largest filmography, but has a very impactful one, and one that everything in it that I haven't seen, I've been meaning to watch. Part of the reason I haven't watched a bunch of them is they all are kind of similar in terms of, oh, this might ruin your day. Like this is going to hang with you definitely for the day, possibly for a lot longer, and will probably never completely leave your head. Because he chose projects that were both very difficult in terms of the topics that they handled and the frankness and directness with which certain things were shown, but also just sort of had an innate ability to intuit how to show, I'm going to go with like psychological distress and like the inside, a visual metaphor for the inside of a distressed person's head in truly incredible ways. The first thing I ever watched from him was Paprika, which is arguably his most approachable thing that I've watched. And it's still like, it's like watching, at times it's like watching what I've been told an acid trip looks like, and deals with some very heavy topics. And this film does a lot of that, but more. Where Paprika is a bit more absurdist in its presentation, Perfect Blue relies on deep and disturbing realism to get its point across about how stress and anxiety and mental instability, and it can all manifest in various people in various different ways, and the way those things are in their head versus how they are in reality, and how people cope with those things. And rather than trying to answer any questions about how does a person deal with that, or how does a person survive that necessarily, there's a pretty voyeuristic aspect to a lot of his work in terms of just looking at people in their most vulnerable moments, when they are at their lowest, and or they're like most abused, or they're most stressed, and not shying away from the really awful and horrible things about that, but also recognizing the outward and inward ways their coping mechanisms manifest themselves. I don't want to delve too deep into the plot of this film because, well, for one, it's shockingly complex. On its surface, it's pretty simple, but it is indirectly dealing with so many topics and so many sort of individual little things that affect various people's psychological well-being and their physical well-being, that trying to sum it up is nearly impossible. But I also think that a lot of the way that the story evolves is so interesting and natural, that it's not trying to surprise you, but it ends up surprising you. Or at least it ended up surprising me in some ways, just because it was more of an anticipation of thinking how this story could go or should go or would be most approachable from a cinematic or literary point of view, and then having my expectations not necessarily subverted, but sort of almost attacked. It's a really fascinating narrative that I don't think would even lose much on a second watching, because whatever reveals that it does, while they give you more information about earlier elements of the film, and so some of the surprise is no longer there, the impact of that surprise and the reason for doing that, the surprise is more than itself. There are a lot of movies that rely on surprise as their sort of hook, that like, oh, you're going to be shocked by what you see next, or you'll never guess what the reveal is, or something like that. This uses its surprises to set you up for things that are far more impactful, that are at times genuinely disturbing. And there are probably a lot of warnings that should be put on this in terms of if you have like, how do I talk about this without spoiling anything? Let's say stress, anxiety, fear, social anxiety, and let's say fear about the public and public people and being attacked. Those are all, I'm being careful with what I say, both for YouTube and for the spoilers, and for trying not to, be too explicit, because this is a very troubling story. At its core, it's about a young woman who is in the idol industry in Japan, which is a topic I could delve into, and deserves a lot of analysis and consideration in a very general sense. But an industry that has historically had a lot of troubling and exploitative behaviors, that happen within it, and a lot of abuse, both like just general monetary exploitation and sort of ties into darker and seedier elements of both criminal and non-criminal enterprises. And the way that our character is set up for a hopeful arc, only to find that it is in fact not, it's not what she expected. And in addition to all that, it's not even that the outward effects of the arc that she's on are so horrible. It's that the inward effects of having those realizations about the industry and about what she's doing on a daily and weekly and monthly basis are so impactful to her mental health that the harm she does to herself, not intentionally, mind you, but the mental harm that she does being in her own head is so much stronger. It also uses this to really good effect in its storytelling, both by using having very generous use of flashbacks and flashbacks, let's say, and these very really well produced transitions. This movie has some of the strongest transitions I've ever seen in any media ever, basically, in terms of transitioning from one scene to another, or one mental state to another, or even one character to another. They are so smooth and so beautifully artistically executed. Every transition is done with incredible finesse and a deliberateness that means it is not simply the director realizing that a scene has ended and cutting and moving to the next one. It is a recognition that those transitions are just as important, or can be just as important if executed properly, as the film itself. And so using that finesse towards telling things about the mental state and focus and confusion of the characters works to an incredible end. I've got so many more things to talk about. I'm going to try and not ramble on too long about it, because I just think it's definitely worth watching if that wasn't already made pretty clear. The music and sound design is impeccable. It's at times very subtle and at times incredibly aggressive. And in a movie that is focused on various things where audio itself is important in the first place, and the both presence and absence of noise is sort of thematically appropriate for the world that the characters are in, as well as deeply impactful when those normalcies are disturbed. Really is used to really good effect. There are some really very aggressive musical and sound effect uses as well that seem like they should be over the top, but work incredibly well towards setting tone, where the movie would still absolutely work without them. But in the same way, this is going to be a terrible metaphor, but I'm going to use it anyway. In the same way that a big noise in a jump scare movie doesn't do a good job of setting you up for a meaningful emotional response other than just random fear, this does expert use of really strong audio to elicit not just the sort of emotional responses of surprise and initial like sort of those sets of emotions that are more about your snap judgments, but also like a continuing dread that helps you to understand. It's funny how a single audio piece of audio engineering over a couple of seconds can put you so far inside the mental state of a character, to understand like the noise that is happening literally or figuratively inside their head, and the emotional impact that feeds back and forth between that. It's really incredible, and I can't properly articulate it. You have to experience it. What else do I want to talk about? Visually, there are some things that are not the prettiest. Obviously, whenever you're doing traditional animation, or really any animation, even modern animation and with computer assistance, you have to make certain cuts to. You can't put 1,000 hours of detail into every background, you know. And there are a few scenes where I think it suffers a little bit, unrelated to the transfer, although the transfer doesn't help. But generally speaking, I think it actually uses its more toned down style to really good effect. There's still such incredible detail in pretty much every shot that having a color palette that is cooler and less saturated, while initially it seems a little less impactful as a result, I think it serves that when it uses its color palette to stronger effect, the contrast, the juxtaposition, shows how meaningful that can be, changing the color palette just at the right time. What else? Oh, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. This does have an English dub. I did not listen to the English dub. I watched this with the Japanese dub, and with subtitles. I have no idea. I didn't even check what the English dub sounded like, because I just had no intention of watching it that way. So it could be good or it could not be. But I think the voice acting on the Japanese dub is incredible all around. Everybody puts in excellent performances, even the minor characters, and gets through a lot of emotion in voice acting, which can be very difficult. Not only because sometimes the direction is questionable, not a problem here, and sometimes because the script itself does not lead them to the right place. Also, not a problem here. Really excellently formed script that knows when it needs to pipe up and when it needs to be very quiet and not say much for a while, and just let you sort of experience the visual storytelling. And this movie does use quite a few scenes where there's not much audio story, or not much verbal storytelling going on, and it is mostly in situations and reactions and the visual representation of people's experiences. I think I could ramble on about this more. I think it's really powerful, and I think it's going to take more watching of it to really appreciate it fully. And because this can be truly so troubling to watch, because of both its visual content and the sort of kind of traumatic mental, like, it does such a good job of expressing the traumatic mental state of characters that I think it's hard, at least for me, not to feel some amount of like empathy for well, certainly there's an empathetic feeling in general for the situations going on, but like a very intense direct feeling of the emotions, these strong emotions that are being portrayed on screen. And because it goes deeper than what's directly on screen, when you like get to have an understanding of the character, that how the character's experience of what happened on screen hurt them more than was actually apparent, or affected them more than was actually apparent, that impact is just that much stronger. Anyway, I can feel myself starting to ramble about this. I think this is incredible. If you've ever seen it, please leave me a comment. If you go to watch it as a result of this video, please leave it as well. It's really, really interesting. And I can understand why it would be kind of unapproachable, both because it's a slightly older Japanese animated film, foreign language film for people outside of Japan, obviously. And also because it's very troubling. It's hard to watch a lot of the time. Anyway, thank you guys for watching another episode of Solipsist Watched. I've been your host, the Social Solipsist, and I'll see you guys next time.